Creative portrait photography. This video is generously supported by the Royal Photographic Society South Wales and Rhondda Creative Community Group.
Shemai, hello, I'm Lucy Jane Purrington and welcome to this video about creative and surreal portraits you can make at home with no professional photography equipment. I'm a creative portrait photographer from South Wales and I think that photography should be accessible for everyone to give it a go. It's all about the idea and not the gear. I'm usually all about Photoshop, but over the past few months I've been exploring ways to make creative portraits at home without Photoshop. There are a few barriers putting people off to try portrait photography.
Cost of equipment.
My main camera is second-hand. I use one lens. My tripod is third-hand, but I'll be swapping my camera for this. I'll be using this old Android smartphone to take my photographs with. This means no control over shutter speed, no control over ISO on the front-facing camera, no control over aperture. I'm also ditching the computer and Photoshop. And in its place, I'll be using a free phone photo editing app. Why this one? It's free, it's intuitive and easy to use. The navigation is simple. It offers a variety of editing tools. You can download it from Play Store. I'm going to be showing you how I set up each photograph, what materials or props I use, through to how I edit that image on the phone. Models. Usually I advise you to ask friends and family to model for you. It's a great way to get some practice in with people you're comfortable with. However, under lockdown and social distancing rules, it's time to turn the camera around. Remember, check your local government advice on lockdown rules. Modelling yourself is a great way to find out what it's like to be on the other side of the camera. You'll really develop your understanding of how to pose for images, meaning that you can also give better instructions to your models when the time comes. Also, you could feel a bit apprehensive about photographing other people. Photographing yourself is a great way to test out the waters. It's how I started. Now before we get started, there's some things we need to consider. Backgrounds and backdrops. You'll need a nice background when you're making these images. What's behind you can make or break an image. In place of professional backdrops, you can use walls, doors, curtains, drape or peg fabric over banisters, doors and furniture. In place of fabric, you can use bed sheets, towels, lighting. Photography is painted with light, so we need to consider our light source. The majority of images featured in this video are lit by indirect sunlight from a nearby window. It's still sunny in Wales. You can also use lamps, torches, smartphones with a free downloaded torchlight app, on-camera flash lighting. You can also use foil to reflect light to fill in if one side is a bit dark. Tripod. You can try holding your camera phone for some of these shots, but I find it easier to use this DIY tripod made from toilet roll cardboard. As you can see here, slits have been cut to hold the phone in place and I've taped it down to a metal weight to hold it in position. Alternatively, you could tape it down to a DVD case that you're not too bothered about putting sticky tape on, and that'll hold it down securely. Just be careful and make sure it's safe and secure. Phone setup. A 5-second delay in your camera options will allow you to press and pose in time. I either physically click the camera or I use the voice activated control. Shoot. It actually understands my accent. Experiment with this. It's really fun to see how you can change the look of a lot of photos in post. Now take care when you're making these pictures. If there's anyone around, ask them to help and assist. These ideas are just guides. Feel free to put your own spin on them. Right, let's get cracking.
We'll start with something you might have at home, a cardboard box. This is a great one to start off on if you're new to portrait photography, as you don't need to consider facial expressions or where to point your gaze. This is straight out of the phone camera. Going through the editing of the image, the saturation has been lowered with a slight blue tone added, and then the shadows have been upped and a darkening vignette finishes this image off. And here's the final product. This second image serves as an example of something different you could do with the image in post-production. And that is to play around with the filter effects. They're quick and easy to add on, and you can change the opacity or strength of each filter. Again, I've darkened around the edges to draw the eye inwards. They say that framing is the most important thing in photography. This first section of the video is going to centre around interacting with household objects. Check out Erwin Wurm 1-minute sculptures for inspiration. Here's the first of 3 photos using 2 frames to produce creative portraits. In each image you can see how they are altered using preset filters, saturation, darkening or lightening around the edges. Adjustments are made by either adding or subtracting from the warmth option, and shadows and highlights. Experimenting with different poses can produce quirky pictures. Doing something a bit silly like this is a way of defeating that worry about how we'll look in photos. In Wales, we're great at making fun of ourselves for a laugh, so this should ease you right in. Why not pull some daft faces and just mess around a bit, enjoy it. Like this one. The original picture seems a bit flat. The natural light from the window is hitting my one side, and with the white walls of the room, the daylight is bounced around quite well. Here's a mock table, because I don't have a dining room table. It's made from a cardboard box and bedsheet. You can create a warped perspective effect by filling glasses with water. The first adjustments that have been made are the shadows and highlights have been upped. Secondly, the saturation has also been increased. And finally, warmth has been added to. That makes the photograph pop. Adding a filter on top adds a stylized look. Going through the filters, nothing seemed to work, so in making this photo black and white by stripping down the saturation, it completely transformed the image. Monochromatic images always feel more serious, more sculptural, and with the not so serious content, it's my nod to the surreal photography work of Salvador Dali. To make similar warped effects, you can also try photographing through the ends of jam jars, crystals, prisms and frosted windows. And if you're stuck for clear wall space to use as a backdrop, you can use doors. It'll also give you a textured look. Needing to get a shot from a high level, I've popped the toilet roll tripod onto a nearby shelf. I don't like to crop if I can, as you lose size and quality, but sometimes it's difficult to get what you need in shot, and positioning is always a big challenge when it comes to self-portraits. The blemish tool was used to remove a line I didn't like in shot. It's a neat little option that works much like the spot healing brush tool in Photoshop. Another tip, don't try any heavy hardback books, they're not good for your neck. The next few photographs are all about books. If you see some weird books in here, they're from mine and my partner's uni days. Here I've stacked them up and created a book tower. You'll notice by now I tend to use the same effects and make the same adjustments to each photograph. Using phone apps to edit rather than Photoshop forces you to simplify your way of working. Knowing that there are limitations to what you can and cannot do is wonderfully freeing in that it inspires you to think creatively about your image making. You've got to get it right on the night when there's no clone tool. Sorry Danwood, I'm erasing your title on the book here. A small hole has been made in a stack of books which the camera phone is positioned opposite to get a shot straight through to the other side. You can see me posing with a book, deeply invested in what the late Berger has to say on the male gaze in art. Having no control of the aperture, ISO or shutter speed of the phone camera, it came out a bit bright. So after bringing back some lost details with the sharpness tool, adjustments are made to brighten back some depth by increasing the shadows before adding a filter. Warmth is then increased. The blemish tool cleverly erases the author's name in the book to the top right corner. A vignette is added. Exposure is lowered. And the saturation increased. Finished. Torch time! This little rechargeable LED torch is fab. You can alter the beam brightness and aperture. This was shot at night with a dull ceiling light on. This was just placed inside a book to make it appear as though magic were emanating from the written words. Envisioning this photograph beforehand to encapsulate the narrative I had in mind, I knew that it would need to have bold colours with deep blacks to contrast against. The blue tone of the LED light washed out the warmer tones and colours, so this needed to be corrected in post. Now, whilst in lockdown, many people now have had the time to read and are rediscovering the joy of losing yourself in a good book. I wanted to capture that magical feeling. This last book-themed picture is a flashback to those university and dissertation days. I'm dyslexic, so reading for me can be a challenge, which is why I love photography. All photography is about communication, and the hardest part is perhaps working out what you want to say. Making creative portraits can serve as a way to externalize something that needs to be said. The hows are an afterthought. Content, colours, tones all work together to build a story. Notice how the blue tones and the contrasting warm tones can change the mood of a picture instantly. This is not an ideal background for a photo. You can use bed sheets or duvets as a DIY backdrop. Here you can see me clipping a sheet to a wardrobe with clothes pegs. Note, I do not endorse plastic pegs, they came with the house. Referencing the 1-minute sculptures project that I mentioned earlier, I wanted to explore household items and the everyday surreal ways in which we use or utilise them. Using the on-camera flash in close quarters will create this sort of look. It's quite a harsh look, but when there's not enough available light, on-phone flash can be your only option. So why don't you have a look around your house and see what safe objects you can find and think of odd ways to pose with them. The more ridiculous, the better. If you're indoors with someone else, why not challenge each other to see what weirdness you can both come up with? Other objects you could use are ironing boards, chairs, fruit, plants, lamps, anything that's safe. Some of the preset filter effects have a distinct film-esque feeling. Selecting one that amplifies the yellow and green tones gives the image an eerie or odd atmosphere. I suppose putting a broom to your hair is a bit odd. Similar to the previous shots, I'm experimenting with ways to pose with the object, in this case a mop. As both objects were grey in colour, I've tried to create a colour theme by also wearing grey. Looking through the images taken with various poses, the image that was chosen was similar to the one with the broom, as I thought that they complemented each other. Sometimes when you're bouncing between different ideas or subject matter, you see a pattern or a link emerge between work, and it's always exciting when that happens. This is how bodies of linked work emerge. Going through the adjustments, highlights, shadows and the vibrance have been increased, and a pinky tint added. To finish, there's a quick tidy up with the blemish tool. Please only do this at home if your brooms and mops are clean. Mix and match colours. Do you have a shirt or jumper that complements or contrasts to your chosen object? Have a look at colour theory. What colours work well together? Learn the rules, then break them. Cropping the image in closer to eliminate the messy background at the top, the focus is solely on the person in the photo. Backgrounds can add content, colour and depth, but in a setup like this is a bit of a distraction. I was a bit indecisive about how to alter this image, as you can see, trying out various filters and adjustments. And if you're new to this, just experiment. You could pick one image and try out multiple edits and see what your tastes are. Look into other people's work. The internet is a wonderful resource. It just keeps getting sillier. This is an owl cushion. I love owls. Cropping the image removed the clutter from the top section and unfortunately clothing label sticking out. In my defense, I couldn't see what I looked like. Head into the filters, a yellowy green toned one is selected. In adjustments, the fade option gives a washed out appearance that mimics old film pictures. Here we have the last ridiculous object. Can you guess what these will be used for? Do, 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 do. First off, the food option under enhancements makes the picture pop a bit more with automatic increased contrast, saturation and a darkening vignette. Adjustments to the shadows, highlights, fade and warm settings add to this effect. Then a quick filter on top brightens the picture to life with bold yellow tones. We're going to get crafty and recreate this image by the late Storm Thorgerson. You'll need tape, scissors, cotton, pen, paper. First, align the two pieces of paper on the shorter side and then tape together. I'm using A4. If you have larger pieces of paper, skip the sticking bit. Place your hands on the paper, making a clawed hand pose as if you're trying to scrape or claw, and draw around each fingertip with the pen. Using these outlines as guides, rip the paper to form long sections, like so. When you get to the taped section, cut jagged sections across to the plain paper using the scissors. And continue ripping. Tape a length of cotton to the side that will be facing away from the camera. Tape the ends of the paper to the corresponding digits. And pose! If you look into Storm Thorgerson's work, you may recognise some of the music album artwork. This image again felt a bit dull, so adjustments were made to brighten it and make the image more punchier. The wow factor is in the paper effect, so it didn't require much editing. Using thick cards, a blade knife and a metal ruler and pencil to mark out the measurements, a DIY Polaroid frame was made. Please use a cutting mat, mine is unfortunately out of friends at the moment. This card frame is a bit bigger than a real Polaroid, but a larger aperture works best for the effect we're going to try and create. When making this card frame, remember to have one side wider than the others. The splash tool allows you to draw in sections in colour and leave others in black and white. So I've coloured all around the white frame but left the centre desaturated. It's a bit of a tedious job, but the effect is quite striking. This colour splash technique is also called colour popping. Colour popping is used to isolate one colour in a photograph while the rest of the image is manipulated to black and white or desaturated. It's a technique that seems to divide photographers, but whatever your preference or opinion, it's a fun and simple method to make your images stand out. This is another one for people that do not want to have their faces in photographs. Much like me, I'm still getting over my shyness. Fold sheets of A4 paper in half the long way and cut small strips. Then cut down the middle. Draw an oval shape about the size of your face onto card and cut out. Cut to fit the paper strips and then tape or glue to the oval card. Fluff the paper up, bending it gently so that it stands up on end. Cut 2 lengths of string and attach to the back of the card. You can then carefully tie these around the back of your head and wear the card as a mask. And this is how it comes out. Let's give this a quick boost with the enhancements. I've chosen scenery before adjusting the saturation and warmth. Bingo! Using tape and some paper rubbish that was destined for the recycle bin, another mask was made. Simply scrumple up the paper, then partially unfold and tape together into a mass, then attach 2 lengths of string as with the previous mask. This first filter, which is a personal favourite, was used to increase the bluey, purple and reddish yellow tones. Slight adjustments were made to up the contrast. This is an example of how quick and simple it can be to produce creative portraits at home on your own, with rubbish. Moving on, if you wish to create more avant-garde images, these next few photographs are for you. Check out Nick Knight for inspiration, he is wonderfully weird. Here I've painted my face. I'm no makeup artist, so I used red lipstick and blended using a small and soft painter's brush. Remember, makeup is for all genders. I'm fortunate to have a plain red wall which acted as a great backdrop. Alternatively, dig out any red fabric, paper, bed sheets or towels. I've draped fabric around myself. Fabric is a fantastic photography prop you can use. It's versatile and lightweight if you're out and about carrying it. Shadows, highlights and vibrance have been increased, which separated the figure from the background a bit more and created more depth in the picture. The blemish tool was used to colour in areas of normal skin tone that were popping through the fabric, and a stray hair. The food option in enhancements gave a quick fix. It upped the contrast and saturation. This filter made the reds more intense with a slight purple tone. A darkening vignette was added to draw the eye in and create more depth. Much the same as the previous photo, except I wanted a bluey-greeny tone added to the skin to contrast with the excessive use of the colour red. To do that, I added a quick filter and an adjustment to the shadows and highlights finishes this off. The previous images were lit by bright indirect midday sun bouncing around the room. We're going to try something different here. That LED torch is back, this time alongside a milk carton filled with water. Placing the torch on the other side of the milk carton diffuses the light, which means you don't get that harsh bright light beam. Perfect for when there's limited light available. Again, here's some fabric and a face of odd makeup. I mentioned shooting in low light. The one issue you can experience is that if you're using auto camera settings, or like here, a phone camera, the auto shutter speed on your device may produce images that aren't as sharp as you'd like. The sharpness tool is a quick fix, but watch out it doesn't add too much grain and pixelation. Another trick I use is to increase the contrast. You can additionally try to separate the foreground from the background to produce crisper edges, as I have done here by darkening the background. For this tutorial, you will need a large picture frame, tape, scissors, wool or string. If you haven't got a big frame, you can use cardboard by cutting away the middle section. Tape one end of the string on the back of the picture frame or card. Zigzag the wool or string back and forth at different angles. Until it looks a little something like this. What's left of my red lippy? Glasses off. You may not have spare bits of fabric around the house, so here's a hat I made from a jumper. And a hoodie turned into a stylish shawl poncho thing. Grab the frame and there you go. The food option is selected in the Enhance menu, before adjustments are made by lowering the warmth, increasing the shadows, decreasing the highlights because I'm so pale, and vibrance increased. The image is then sharpened, a darkening vignette is added, and the blemish tool is used to remove some stray hairs around the face and neck. Whilst I had this set up, I thought I'd try a different approach and photograph through this glittery red table runner. Shooting through fabric, colour gels or tissue is a fun way of experimenting in camera to see what sort of effects you can achieve. Other things you could try photographing through are sweet wrappers, plastic bottles, translucent bags, lace fabric. Hold the items up close to the camera lens and then far away. See what the different effects are. You may have noticed I've used the colour red a lot. It is one of my favourite colours. It's also the only colour other than black in my wardrobe. Using the same fabric and dropping glitter everywhere in the room, I twisted and bunched it together, then folded it on top of my head, channeling my inner Lady Gaga. Posing in shots like this can feel a bit awkward. Please don't let this put you off. When you think about it, it's a completely unnatural situation. So don't worry, try not to take it too seriously. Have a look through photographs of yourself and see what ones you find flattering. Take note of how you're posed. What's your facial expression? What are you doing with your hands? See if you can recreate those poses at home. Practice in the mirror. I like to play around, move my gaze to different angles. It's hard to know where to look. Try imagining a large box around the lens and look at each corner and take a shot. Then see what works best. Another idea, take bursts of photos if your device has that option. They'll capture a series of images over a short period of time and you select the best. This is also a great setting if you're on the move. You can also try tilting your body to one side and bringing your face back towards the camera. Try a head tilt. Lift your chin up. Lean into the photo. Mind you don't topple over though. Don't have a fancy frock or top? Use a sheet. Taken at night with the lights off, only a small lamp illuminates the scene. If you don't have floaty fabric, you can use summer scarves, beach wraps as a substitute. Please be careful, hot laps and fabric do not mix. Don't allow the fabric to touch or rest on the lamp. These types of images will take a few attempts to get the shot you want. The fabric was thrown in the air a second before the image was taken. This photograph was lit by a lamp in front of me, but far away so the light was diffused and spread out. This is how you end up with the ghostly images with a lot of movement, because it's a dark setting that's tricked the phone camera into having a long shutter speed. Try moving the lamp around and experiment with different lighting effects. In order to capture these, you must hold your pose and keep still for the duration of the shutter being open. This photograph was taken whilst the lamp sat directly behind me, which illuminated the fabric in this peculiar way. The highlights and shadows were increased to enhance the blacks and light areas before the natural tones were developed by upping the vibrance and saturation. Not satisfied with the image as it was at this point, blue filters were then added. By placing the lamp directly in front of me whilst I leaned over, this uplit effect was created. This was another tricky one to edit as I didn't have anything in mind about how I would like it to look. As you see, many adjustments and filters were experimented with before settling on a final look. And this is a way with photography, sometimes you have in mind exactly what you're after, and other times it's more reactionary. I have to admit, I do prefer having a plan and knowing what I'm going to do before I start. We all need a duvet day now and then. It's good for our well-being to indulge in our melancholic feelings sometimes. I enlisted the help of partner Matthew, who is often part of my photo experiments. Laying him on the bed and tucking a white sheet around him, making sure he could breathe, I attempted to recreate at home one of my favourite images shot a few years ago. Due to the perspective challenge of standing over him, the framing is going to be much closer than the example shown. The blemish tool corrected a small section where the bed underneath could be seen. I needed a bigger sheet. Scenery was chosen in enhancements, and a blue toned filter was chosen to hint at a melancholic mood. The warmth was increased slightly to tone the highlights as a contrast to the blue shadows, and the saturation and contrast were altered. Adding a darkening vignette to the left side added a vertical progression from light to dark. Glasses, sheet, sunglasses, pose, 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 pose. The most important thing about photography is to enjoy it. It doesn't have to be serious all the time. And I think because a lot of my work is centered around themes of mental health, I like to have a giggle and be a bit silly sometimes. I wanted a different look for this image to show that by editing, you can create very different vibes to an image. First up, the blemish tool removed a stray piece of cotton that was annoying me. A green and pink toned filter was selected. Saturation, contrast, shadows, vibrance and highlights were all upped. Warmth was lowered to increase the blue tones, creating this horror poster inspired colour palette. As I mentioned earlier, I don't have a dining table, so I made one and threw over a curtain in place of a tablecloth. I placed a phone underneath the plate to tilt it upwards so that the camera could see the contents of the plate. Pine cones! Do not try to eat pine cones at home. A darkening vignette separates the background from the subject matter. Me, pretending to eat pine cones. Why? Because we're living in strange times. A rich tone filter was added and the image enhanced with the food option to bring out the shadows and brighten areas and colours. These were then brought out further by making similar alterations in adjustments. And a little bit of warmth was added. Finished. I'd like to declare that I let the dishes pile up for the artistic purpose of this image. Honest. Locations are a great way to set a tone or feeling. In photographs like this, they also become essential to the story. Don't stay in one place. Examine what you've got around you and explore. So, what do you think this photo was trying to convey? The messy dishes could say that someone is fed up, can't be bothered, or maybe is too busy or preoccupied. The red of the jumper draws the focus onto the two arms, one rising up to add another mug to the pile. But why is the figure on the floor? There is an element of comedy here, but also it could be a lonely image. What do you think? It was sunny out, so to balance the light levels coming through the door window, I've got a lamp and milk carton to diffuse the light, and the ceiling lights were turned on. This is a tiny space, and after trying several different poses, it was evident that I couldn't fit all of myself in there and not look distorted. It can be difficult if you have limited space like this, but my final pose made it work. Going back to discussing narratives again, it's always fun to hear people's varying opinions and interpretations on photographs. Is this photograph about being swamped by bills and the pressures of adulting? Or is it musing on the joy of receiving something in the post when you're eagerly awaiting a package? You know, that feeling of anticipation, having something to look forward to. During lockdown, the post has become even more important, with more than a third of people claiming that receiving a parcel is the highlight of their day, according to research by the Royal Mail. Again, imagining that there's limited space, the window can be a great backdrop. You can hang fabric over curtain poles or use the sunlight to backlight a photo, or hide behind a curtain and poke your feet out. This photograph came out a bit untidy with the white wall showing on the left side of the image. Cropping the photo to remove this made it a better image instantly. The darkening vignettes are one of the more important alterations done to this photo. They draw the eye to the feet and creates more of a contrast between the light feet and the dark areas of the curtain and carpet. The feet now take a centre stage. The use of the colour red again draws focus to key components of the image that I wanted to highlight. Originally, I had posed with arms poking out to the sofa, but sometimes the simpler the idea, the better it works. Looking through the images, I much preferred the ones with just the shoes in shot, as you can see here. Don't you think they're more effective? Now, excluding those red shoes, the image is made up of similar tones of yellows and browns, so I needed to add some depth to the picture. This darkening vignette helped to start this process. Adjustments to the saturation, shadows, highlights and vibrance pop the image some more, and a warm tint corrects a slight green colour cast. A filter was then added to further this. Playing with the transform tool allowed me to change the perspective slightly. It's a great little tool if you have some wonky lines or wish to change the tilt of a photo. Matthew is once again lending a hand. Our hands are so expressive. Great if you're a bit camera shy, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of my work involves hands. I think you get the picture. So this is what we ended up with. This photo could go two ways, comedy or creepy. The filters and tones used to colour the image will decide on this resulting mood. Selecting the green toned filter, I opted for creepy. The darkening vignette adds a moodiness to this image. If you're working on a phone camera, head into settings and turn the flash on. If you haven't already got a 5-second time delay, put that on. Click exposure value and lower it. Now this is one for nighttime. Find a medium to large sized mirror. Conveniently, here's one above the sink. Flick water on it, but try not to have any like dribbling down. Turn off the lights. Position your free hand so that it looks as though you're cupping the dot here you see, the pre-flash as the camera focuses and does a quick light meter reading. Cropping out that slither of fingers that you can see at the bottom. Adjustments are then made to increase the contrast and tone. And this is one of my favourite camera phone tricks, as it's super effective, and although getting the position of the hands can take a few attempts, overall the image is pretty easy to do. Now the camera flash reflects in the water droplets and creates this starry night magical effect. So this is a fun one to try out with young photographers. Glasses off, serious business. This is another nighttime shot. Holding the LED torch in my hand, the light is reflecting off my palm to illuminate my face. Add a hairdryer to it and magic. Now please be careful the torch doesn't heat up. Again, this took a few goes to capture the right air blowing effect. If you don't have a hairdryer, you could flick your hair to capture movement, or ask someone else to stand behind you and do that as you pose. Or another approach could be to lay on a bed and have your hair naturally fall backwards. If you don't have long hair, you could use a scarf or another floaty item of clothing and position it so that it appears that it's blowing behind you. Whilst making the previous picture, I liked the glowing hand effect, so here's another take on it, a simplified version. I wanted it to look like I had a handful of glowing bugs rather than something magical. Mind you, glowing bugs are kind of magical. Again, I want to reiterate, please do take care that the torch you're using doesn't heat up. Now this naturally came out with a very warm and reddish tone, and I wanted to sort of up that and make the hands the main focus. Now oddly, my arms were lit quite well by the bouncing light, so the outer edges were darkened along with the areas around my hands. The sharpness was increased as this was taken in a low light setting where the shutter was most likely open for a while, so there was a slight motion blur in this image. For the next picture, you will need a smartphone. I've image searched for red background and set the screen brightness of the phone to 100%, which is hard to see. Let me turn the light off. There you go. And I've attached an old blue colour gel, slightly ripped, to a LED torch using a hair bobble. If you don't have colour gels, start collecting sweet wrappers. Great excuse to tuck into some chocolate. I personally don't need an excuse. The blue light was used to illuminate behind me and the red to light my face. The blemish tool improved this image no end. A random speck was erased and the edge of the torch can be seen on the left hand side. That was removed. We took a few goes, mind you. The way that this function works is it copies whatever is next to the area that's clicked. So big cover jobs like this may take a few attempts of editing a small section like the outside areas first, saving and then going back into the option and working on top of that area to perfect the coverage. The last few images, there's been a bit of a setup required or props that have been needed to make the images work. So let's do something which requires neither, just a wall. And making creative portraits doesn't have to rely on these things. Stripping everything back, consider how you could go about making an interesting picture from trying different poses with a wall. This is an easy one to work on in post. All adjustments were to just brighten out the colours a bit more and increase the shadows a bit. Now my main concern was to remove some patchy marks on the wall from my face and hands by using the blemish tool. Shame I can't actually get them off the wall. The previous image was lit by a nearby window and a lamp behind me, both of which were creating some unwanted shadows. So as I was testing where to stand to best avoid them, I was pointing at the wall with my one hand. I noticed a creation of Adam by Michelangelo kind of effect. So I went with it. And I wanted to make this image feel paintery as a reference. By blocking out some of the available light from the window, the image had more grain in the lower light level. Now grain is a bit of a Marmite subject, love it or hate it. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to grain and personal taste. I like grain. I'm having to trick the camera phone flash again for this shot. Having the ceiling light on whilst the camera phone does a light meter reading with the flash, it'll register there's already quite bright in the room. So quickly turning the lights off for when it does take the photo will make the resulting image appear darker. Some questions for you. Colour or black and white? How do you know if an image should be colour or monochromatic? Do you shoot something knowing if you want it in colour or not? For this photograph, I'd already decided that it would be monochromatic, and that's often the way. I typically shoot in colour and find thinking in terms of black and white means you're looking for something different. Textures, shadows, and contrasts. It's just a different way of looking. Why don't you try photographing in black and white? Train your eye to look for these things. I quickly want to point out another useful tool called whitening. It's basically a lightening tool that you draw on. It takes a bit of patience, but it's a handy tool. Most of these images have been shot in portrait orientation, the longer sides of the image running from top to bottom. Rotating the camera phone to landscape can completely alter the framing and produce a very different image. Reasons for shooting in landscape could be that you want to capture more widthways. Think of how few mountain or seascapes you see in portrait. This picture was easier to capture in landscape, but I had the intention to rotate it 90 degrees back to portrait in post. Using arms as a sculptural tool, why don't you try and make interesting shapes? Safely contort your fingers, hands or arms into unusual poses. Think back to making shadow puppets as a child. Now, I like this tree kind of shape. If you've got company with you, why don't you both join in and create some odd sculptural shapes together? You could have a sea of hands rising up or arms interwoven, holding on to each other from opposite sides. Experiment. I had another idea. I grabbed my boots and fancy shoes and put them on my hands. Rotating the image gives the viewer what they'd expect to see. A pair of limbs and a pair of shoes on the end. Except their hands, not feet. A slight crop removed a slither of t-shirt that was poking into shot. Filters and adjustments were made to give this a warm tone, which removed the original blue-based tones. And a vignette darkens around the edges.
Diolch am wylio, thank you for watching. I hope this video has inspired you to give creative portrait photography a go at home. I'd love to see your images, so please tag me at. Get creative and keep safe.
This video is generously supported by the Royal Photographic Society South Wales and Rhondda Creative Community Group.